In the spring of 1908, a Union Pacific Railroad surveyor made a chilling discovery that would cast a shadow over Las Vegas for the next century. While surveying potential expansion routes through the Nevada desert just 3 years after the city's land auction, he stumbled upon an unmarked cemetery hidden behind a cluster of Joshua trees about 4 miles southwest of the bustling railroad town. What made this find so unsettling wasn't just the presence of graves in such an unforgiving landscape, but the precise arrangement of 89 burial mounds, each exactly 6 feet apart, forming a perfect grid pattern that defied explanation. The surveyor's official report, locked away in Union Pacific's archives until 1987, contained a single disturbing detail. All the burials appeared to have occurred in a concentrated period between late 1905 and early 1908. Strangely, local residents, many of whom had arrived after the 1905 land auction that established Las Vegas, claimed no knowledge of any cemetery in that location. Territorial records showed no permits for such a large burial ground either. For over 70 years, the railroad company avoided the site, rerouting their tracks to bypass it, and the few who knew of its existence whispered about it in hushed tones, calling it Henderson's harvest. Now prepare to hear the chilling truth behind those 89 graves, a tale that began with the American dream of land ownership in a frontier boomtown and spiraled into Nevada's most systematic killing spree. Before we delve deeper into the story of the Henderson family and their dark secret, know that this channel isn't for the faint of heart. It's for those brave enough to uncover America's darkest mysteries. If that sounds like you, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. We're building a community of mystery seekers, and your story might be next. Now let's uncover the truth about what happened in the desert outside Las Vegas between 1905 and 1908. When Senator William Clark's land auction concluded on May 15, 1905, Las Vegas transformed overnight from a mere railroad stop into a thriving frontier town. The completion of the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad brought with it new opportunities, drawing thousands of hopeful settlers to the Nevada desert, each seeking prosperity in America's newest railroad city. Among those who missed the initial auction but arrived afterward was 42-year-old Jeremiah Henderson, a former cattle rancher from Utah Territory, who had lost everything in a series of brutal winters and bad investments. He arrived in Las Vegas in August 1905 with his wife Sarah, their 3 children, and exactly $63, not enough to purchase prime city lots, but enough to stake a claim in the rapidly growing town. Please give me a like and subscribe so I can be motivated to create more great videos. The Hendersons set up a modest homestead 6 miles southeast of the city center, where Jeremiah established a way station offering supplies, meals, and shelter to the steady stream of travelers arriving by rail and wagon. Sarah, a devout Mormon woman with extensive frontier medical knowledge, quickly earned a reputation throughout the community for her skill in treating ailments ranging from snake bites to fever. The Henderson children, Mary, 15, Samuel, 12, and Rebecca, 8, adapted to desert life watching as their circumstances gradually improved along with the city's growth. But Jeremiah had bigger dreams than just running a way station. He eyed several prime lots near the railroad depot properties that had sold for top dollar during the land auction and had only become more valuable as the city expanded. However, established businessmen from Los Angeles and Salt Lake City controlled the most coveted real estate, leaving a struggling homesteader with little chance of competing. Las Vegas in late 1905 was a rough and rapidly growing town where fortunes were made in a day and men reinvented themselves every morning. The population exploded from the initial auction buyers to include railroad workers, merchants, prospectors, gamblers, confidence men, and anyone else searching for opportunity in a place where a man's past was of little concern. This influx of people brought both opportunity and danger for families like the Hendersons. While the constant flow of travelers meant steady business for their way station, it also meant that dangerous men, often carrying large sums of money, passed through a region where law enforcement was practically non-existent. Jeremiah knew that success in this environment demanded more than hard work and integrity. It required bold opportunism, the same kind that had built many frontier fortunes. And so, he was prepared to take risks that would have been unthinkable in the settled communities he had left behind. Jeremiah Henderson's transformation from a struggling homesteader to something much darker began on a blistering September morning in 1905, when a man calling himself Thomas Edwards arrived at the Hendersons' way station with a peculiar request and a story that immediately caught Jeremiah's attention. Edwards, claiming to be a former railroad supervisor on the run from embezzlement charges in California, arrived at the Henderson homestead, carrying a hefty roll of Bill's quality gear and a nervous energy that betrayed his desperation. His plan was clear. He needed to vanish, and fast, ensuring that no trace of his former life remained. More importantly, he'd heard whispers about isolated homesteads in Nevada, where men with specific needs could start anew. Edwards sought exactly that, a chance to disappear completely. His offer was staggering. "I've heard," he said in a hushed voice, "that a man with the right connections can simply vanish out here, become someone else entirely. I'm willing to pay $500 for such help." To Jeremiah, who had been counting every dollar and wondering if their meager savings would last through another harsh desert winter, $500 was more than the family had earned in the last 2 years combined. The opportunity tempted him, but it also posed a moral dilemma. Would he abandon his principles for financial security? What Jeremiah devised that night was as simple as it was horrifying. While Edward slept in the traveler's cabin, Jeremiah crept in and smothered him with a pillow, ensuring no signs of struggle and no evidence that could attract unwanted attention. The next morning, Jeremiah buried Edwards's body in a carefully measured grave behind their homestead, marking the spot with a small stone bearing only the number 1. The victim's money, horses, and equipment were either kept by the family or sold off discreetly in Las Vegas, with Jeremiah explaining that Edwards had decided to continue his journey to California in the early hours. But the most chilling aspect of Edwards's murder wasn't the crime itself. It was how Jeremiah responded. Instead of feeling guilt, he felt a cold satisfaction analyzing the murder for potential improvements. He discovered with shocking clarity that he had the emotional detachment and practical skills needed to solve his family's financial woes through systematic killings. The success of Edwards's murder made it clear to Jeremiah that he had found a new path, one that offered him power control and financial stability. Within weeks, Jeremiah quietly spread word through Las Vegas's saloons and boarding houses that his homestead could offer special services to those wanting to start fresh. He was careful in his selection, targeting men who were already on the run from the law. These were the types of men whose disappearances would raise fewer questions and thus less risk of investigation. Meanwhile, young Samuel Henderson, ever observant, began noticing disturbing changes in his father's behavior. He had met Edwards, helped tend to his horses, and had shared meals with the man who had now vanished without a trace. When Samuel inquired about Edwards's abandoned possessions, his father dismissed the questions harshly, warning the boy to mind his own business. As autumn rolled in, the Henderson family found themselves prospering, benefiting from the booming Las Vegas economy and the growing railroad industry. Their way station thrived, serving the endless stream of travelers, workers, and entrepreneurs passing through. But behind the veneer of success, Jeremiah's dark business was quietly expanding. The murder of Thomas Edwards had been the first of many, followed by 3 more killings before the end of 1905. His victims, all desperate men looking to escape their criminal pasts, included a deserter who had stolen an army payroll, a con man on the run from fraud charges, and a cattle rustler wanted for murder. Each had heard rumors of a place where men could vanish and start anew, and each had been drawn to the Henderson homestead by these whispers. Jeremiah's selection process was methodical and merciless. He would engage each man in conversation, weighing their financial resources against the likelihood that their disappearance would attract attention. Those with enough money, but no one to notice their absence, were ideal targets. Those with ties to family or business were turned away. Sarah Henderson's role in these gruesome crimes was tragic and complex. While she had no direct involvement in the killings, her silence and complicity, coupled with her skill in treating the wounds of those who came to them, made her an unwitting accomplice. Over time, the family situation grew darker as Jeremiah's descent into murder became a way of life. Yet to those on the outside, the Henderson family appeared nothing more than hard-working settlers making their way in the desert, blissfully unaware of the true horrors lurking just beneath the surface of their seemingly simple homestead. Though Sarah had not initially suspected her husband's sinister actions, she had begun to notice disturbing inconsistencies in his explanations for their improved financial situation and the strange regular appearance and disappearance of travelers at their homestead. As time passed, Jeremiah's personality had shifted, becoming more distant and cold, his once kind demeanor replaced by a growing callousness toward human life. Her suspicions reached a breaking point in December 1905, when while cleaning the bedroom, she discovered a leather-bound journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The book contained chilling records of 7 murders, complete with detailed descriptions of the victims' estimates of their wealth and precise locations of their burial sites. The most disturbing part was Jeremiah's cold clinical observations about improving his methods and expanding his operation. The confrontation that followed between Sarah and Jeremiah revealed the full depth of his moral corruption. Instead of remorse or regret, Jeremiah spoke of his actions with the cold logic of a businessman. "These men are already dead," he said calmly. "They've committed crimes that have put them beyond redemption. They can never return to the lives they had before. What I'm offering them is peace, permanent peace. And what they're offering me is the means to secure our family's future in this new city." His words were chilling, but they also reflected his vision, a vision that went beyond simply accumulating wealth through murder. Jeremiah had studied the rapid growth of Las Vegas and had identified several properties near the railroad depot that he believed would make his family wealthy. His calculations indicated that completing 89 successful operations would provide enough money to purchase these prime lots and establish himself as a legitimate businessman. Sarah's response to the revelation was a mix of horror and terror for her family's future. She knew her husband had become monstrous, but she also understood the danger in exposing him. Any attempt to stop him would likely result in her own death and the destruction of her children. The knowledge that she was married to a serial killer was unbearable, but the realization that she was now complicit in his crimes was even worse. The pressure on the Henderson family grew as Jeremiah's operation expanded throughout 1906. Samuel, the eldest son, had begun to keep careful count of the men who visited their homestead and never left. While Sarah struggled with the moral weight of preparing meals and offering comfort to men she knew were about to be murdered, young Mary and Rebecca remained largely unaware of the true nature of their family's activities. However, they sensed the tension between their parents and noticed Samuel's increasingly withdrawn behavior. Their innocent questions about these changes only added to the strain on Sarah and Jeremiah. As 1906 wore on, Jeremiah's victims became a more diverse group drawn to the Henderson homestead by rumors of the special services Jeremiah offered. Railroad workers spread the word throughout their networks, and wanted men began arriving from as far away as Texas and California, seeking Jeremiah's help in vanishing without a trace. Each successful operation made Jeremiah more confident and ambitious. He raised his fees, targeted wealthier victims, and began planning for the eventual expansion of his criminal enterprise beyond Nevada. But most chillingly, he began to view his family not as loved ones, but as potential liabilities to be managed in service of his grander ambitions. By early 1907, Las Vegas had evolved from a rough tent city into an established railroad town with over 1,500 residents and the beginnings of formal law enforcement. This growth brought new opportunities for legitimate businesses, but it also posed a challenge for men like Jeremiah, who relied on the lawless atmosphere of a frontier town to carry out their illegal activities. The establishment of a town marshal's office in 1907 represented the first serious threat to Jeremiah's operations. Marshal William Bill Thompson, a former railroad detective, had been hired specifically to combat the rising tide of crime and violence that accompanied the city's rapid expansion. His arrival coincided with an increase in inquiries from territorial authorities about missing persons, a situation that Jeremiah understood was beginning to attract unwanted attention. Railroad companies, mining operations, and law enforcement agencies were starting to ask questions about men who had disappeared while passing through Las Vegas. Although none of these inquiries had yet focused on the Henderson homestead, Jeremiah knew that the walls were closing in. Instead of slowing down, Jeremiah decided to accelerate his operation. Rather than being more careful, he opted to complete his 89 planned murders before law enforcement could coordinate their efforts. This required him to abandon his previous careful selection process and begin actively hunting for victims rather than waiting for them to seek his services. The winter and spring of 1907 marked the deadliest period of the Henderson killing spree. Working with two associates he had recruited from Las Vegas's criminal underworld, Marcus Webb, a former Confederate soldier with a background in systematic violence, and James Pike, an Army deserter, skilled in tracking and disposing of evidence. Jeremiah began targeting solitary travelers along the roads leading to and from Las Vegas. The killings became more frequent, more brutal, and more methodical as Jeremiah worked tirelessly to reach his goal of 89 victims before anyone could stop him. As Jeremiah's operation expanded, his methods grew more ruthless and reckless. No longer content to wait for fugitive criminals to seek him out, the Henderson gang began actively robbing and murdering anyone who appeared to be carrying substantial amounts of money or valuables. Prospectors, traveling salesmen, and even innocent wanderers became targets, and the careful screening process that had once protected the family from unwanted attention was discarded in favor of quickly accumulating the funds needed to complete Jeremiah's grand plan. The psychological toll on the Henderson family was immense. Sarah, now fully aware of the monstrous nature of her husband's actions, had begun documenting the murders in a secret journal. She hoped that one day her records could serve as evidence, or perhaps a way of regaining some semblance of control over the nightmare her life had become. By the summer of 1907, her journal showed that Jeremiah had killed over 60 men, and the speed with which he was completing his murders left her terrified that the death toll would continue to rise before he finished his plan. Samuel, now 13, was also deeply affected by his knowledge of his father's activities. The boy had discovered the graveyard behind their homestead and with horrifying clarity understood the full extent of Jeremiah's crimes. The crushing weight of this knowledge was too much for a child who still loved his father, but could no longer deny the truth. His father had become a monster. Things took a darker turn when Samuel realized that Jeremiah planned to kill him and his mother once the operation was complete. As Jeremiah became increasingly paranoid about potential witnesses, he began viewing his own family as liabilities that would need to be eliminated to protect himself. The situation reached its breaking point in the late summer of 1907, when Marshal Thompson, who had been investigating a rising number of missing persons cases, began focusing his attention on the Henderson homestead. Thompson, an experienced investigator, had noticed a disturbing pattern in the disappearances around Las Vegas, and his methodical approach meant that it was only a matter of time before he turned his focus on Jeremiah and his family. Jeremiah's response to the growing investigation was chilling. Instead of hiding his tracks or fleeing, he began planning the murder of Marshal Thompson, reasoning that eliminating the investigator would buy him enough time to finish his plan and escape to California with his accumulated wealth. Working with his associates Marcus Webb and James Pike Jeremiah, began carefully studying Thompson's routines and formulating a plan to kill him without drawing attention. Meanwhile, the arrival of two influential men in the fall of 1907 would set off a chain of events that would expose the Henderson family's crimes. Theodore Brackman, a railroad investor from San Francisco, had been closely monitoring the growth of Las Vegas, looking for opportunities in the booming real estate market. His curiosity was piqued by Jeremiah Henderson's rapid rise to financial success, especially considering that Henderson had arrived in the area with little more than his family and the clothes on his back. Brackman, with his sharp business instincts, began to suspect that Henderson's newfound wealth was tied to something far darker. He used his connections within the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad to gather information quickly, realizing that the pattern of missing travelers centered around the Henderson homestead. The second arrival was Deputy Territorial Marshal James Collins, assigned to assist Thompson in his investigation. Collins was a seasoned lawman with years of experience tracking missing persons across the Western Territories. His expertise would prove invaluable, especially as he investigated the disappearance of Robert Sterling, a wealthy cattle buyer who had been carrying over $3,000 in cash when he vanished after leaving Las Vegas. Sterling had been heading in the direction of the Henderson homestead, and Collins, recognizing the pattern, began to suspect that his disappearance was connected to the string of unsolved cases. As Collins dug deeper into Sterling's disappearance, the investigation revealed connections to the growing list of missing persons in the area. His methodical approach raised suspicions that the Henderson homestead was a central point in the disturbing puzzle. While Sterling's wealth made him an obvious target for robbery, Collins's experience led him to believe that the case could be part of something much larger and more sinister than a simple robbery gone wrong. The investigation was rapidly gaining traction, and for Jeremiah Henderson, the walls were closing in. Jeremiah's response to the mounting pressure revealed the full extent of his desperation and willingness to escalate his criminal activities. With the help of Webb and Pike, he devised a chilling plan to eliminate not only the immediate threats to his operation, but also several additional victims whose deaths would provide the final funds necessary to complete his land acquisition scheme. The plan was bold and terrifying. Jeremiah proposed to murder Marshal Thompson, Deputy Collins, Theodore Brackman, and other potential witnesses in a series of killings disguised as random acts of frontier violence. The murders would coincide with the acquisition of the targeted properties, after which he intended to flee to California, with his family leaving Webb and Pike to take the fall. For Sarah Henderson, the discovery of this plan marked the final breaking point in her psychological ability to remain silent. The thought of witnessing the deaths of law enforcement officers and innocent businessmen was unbearable. Worse, she realized that Jeremiah's ultimate plan involved eliminating her and their children once he completed his operation. The confrontation between Sarah and Jeremiah that followed her discovery was violent and explosive. For the first time, Sarah directly challenged her husband's authority, threatening to expose his crimes if he proceeded with his deadly plan. In response, Jeremiah's threat to kill her and their children made it clear that he now saw his own family not as loved ones to be protected, but as obstacles to be removed. Meanwhile, Samuel, now 13, realized that his father's plan included his own murder. The boy had long considered ways to expose Jeremiah's crimes, but now faced with the imminent danger of death, he knew he had to act. The plan he devised was both simple and dangerous. He would wait for an opportunity when Jeremiah, Webb, and Pike were away from the homestead, then ride to Las Vegas to report everything to Marshal Thompson and Deputy Collins. He would provide them with the location of the burial ground, copies of the journals documenting his father's crimes, and his own detailed testimony. The night Samuel chose for his mission coincided with the night Jeremiah planned to begin his final killing spree. Watching from his bedroom window, Samuel saw his father and his associates prepare to leave the homestead, armed and carrying the tools necessary for their violent intentions. Once the men had been gone for 2 hours, Samuel saddled his horse and began the perilous journey to Las Vegas, carrying evidence that would expose his father's reign of terror. The ride to town took 4 hours through rugged desert terrain, and Samuel spent the time mentally rehearsing the words he would need to say to destroy his family and save countless future victims. He understood that his testimony would result in his father's execution, but the alternative silence would mean the death of his mother and sisters, along with many more innocent lives. The choice was clear. The truth had to come out. Samuel's arrival in Las Vegas in the early morning hours of October 15, 1907, would change everything. His testimony was so horrifying that Marshal Thompson and Deputy Collins initially struggled to believe it. But the evidence Samuel provided, including detailed journals documenting over 70 murders, was compelling enough to demand immediate action. Samuel's report included precise directions to the burial ground, detailed descriptions of his father's methods, and most importantly, information about Jeremiah's immediate plans to murder law enforcement officers and other potential witnesses. The urgency of this intelligence meant that Thompson and Collins acted quickly. They organized a search party, which included 3 deputized railroad men and Theodore Brackman, who had requested to join in as a concerned civilian. The party was armed and prepared for violent resistance, as Samuel had warned them that Jeremiah and his associates would not surrender without a fight. At dawn on October 16, 1907, the search party arrived at the Henderson homestead. What they found confirmed Samuel's warnings: chaos and preparation for flight. Sarah Henderson was found in the kitchen, bound and gagged, but alive. She had been beaten and threatened during the night, but Jeremiah had not yet gone through with his plan to kill her. Mary and Rebecca, the younger children, were found hiding in the root cellar, traumatized but unharmed. The gun battle with Jeremiah Webb and Pike took place at the burial ground, where the 3 men had been attempting to destroy evidence of their crimes by relocating some of the bodies. The fight was brief but intense, resulting in the deaths of Webb and Pike and the serious wounding of Jeremiah Henderson. As the smoke cleared, the full scale of the Henderson murders began to emerge. The burial ground contained 87 bodies each, buried in the exact pattern that Jeremiah had documented in his journal. The identities of the victims were later confirmed through missing person reports, personal belongings found at the crime scenes, and the meticulous records kept by both Jeremiah and Sarah. Jeremiah's capture marked the end of what authorities would later classify as the most systematic and prolonged murder spree in Nevada's history. The aftermath of the Henderson case marked the beginning of a legal and social controversy that would linger for years as the community struggled to comprehend how an ordinary frontier family could become entangled in such horrific crimes. The immediate days following the gun battle were chaotic, filled with both physical and emotional devastation for those involved. Samuel Henderson, who had ridden back to the homestead with the search party, was forced to witness his father's capture. While his mother and sisters were placed under protective care for the duration of the investigation, the young boy could hardly process the nightmare he had helped expose. His father's first words after his capture were not expressions of remorse, but rather focused on his accumulated wealth and complaints about how his plan had been cut short. Even as he lay bleeding from his gunshot wounds, Jeremiah continued to view his crimes through a financial lens, lamenting that he hadn't been able to acquire the Las Vegas properties that had driven him to kill. The excavation of the burial ground, conducted over the following 2 weeks, unveiled a chilling level of planning and organization. Each grave was meticulously measured and marked the bodies buried with a precision that indicated Jeremiah had approached his murders like a businessman handling a routine operation. The discovery of personal effects, money and jewelry buried with the victims, provided crucial evidence for the prosecution. And it also began the long process of identifying the victims and notifying their families. For many, this revelation brought closure to missing persons cases that had long remained unsolved. The trial of Jeremiah Henderson in Carson City during the spring of 1908 became one of the most highly publicized legal proceedings in the history of Nevada Territory. Newspapers from across the western United States flooded the courtroom, eager to cover what had been dubbed the Henderson Horror. The prosecution's case rested largely on Samuel's testimony, the journals kept by both Jeremiah and Sarah, and the physical evidence recovered from the burial ground. The systematic nature of the crimes, coupled with the overwhelming evidence, left little room for defense, and despite the best efforts of his court-appointed attorney, Jeremiah's conviction seemed all but inevitable. Jeremiah's behavior throughout the trial was as cold and calculating as the crimes he had committed. When confronted with evidence of his killings, he showed no remorse, no sympathy for the families of his victims, and no recognition of the moral wrongness of his actions. When given the chance to speak before his sentencing, he used his time to complain about the interruption to his business plans rather than offer any apology for the lives he had destroyed. The trial's most emotional moment came when Samuel Henderson took the stand to testify against his father. The boy's testimony was both devastating and painful as he relived the horror of witnessing his father's reign of terror. It was evident to many observers that Samuel took no pleasure in his father's conviction, and that he was fully aware of the heavy price his family had paid for his moral courage. In the end, Judge William Morrison sentenced Jeremiah Henderson to death by hanging on 87 counts of murder. The sentence was carried out on July 4th, 1908, exactly 9 months after Samuel's midnight ride to Las Vegas had exposed his father's gruesome crimes. Jeremiah's final words, unrepentant as ever, were, "I did what I had to do to provide for my family's future. If that makes me a monster, then history will judge whether I was right or wrong." Sarah Henderson's legal situation was resolved through a controversial decision by the Territorial Attorney General. In exchange for her cooperation with the investigation and her testimony at trial, she was granted immunity from prosecution. While some critics argued that anyone who had knowingly participated in the murders should face justice, the judge ultimately agreed with the decision, acknowledging that Sarah's information had been crucial in uncovering the full scope of the crimes. He also noted that she had clearly been more a victim than an accomplice. The Henderson case had far-reaching consequences for Las Vegas and the broader Nevada territory. The publicity surrounding the murders severely damaged the region's reputation, particularly as a safe destination for travelers and investors. Local business leaders feared the long-term economic impact of the negative attention, and many were hesitant to invest in the area. Theodore Brackman, who played a key role in uncovering the crimes, eventually purchased some of the land Jeremiah had coveted. However, he chose not to develop it immediately, stating that the land needed time to recover from the evil that had transpired there. The Henderson homestead, meanwhile, was abandoned right after the trial and remained vacant for decades. Several attempts by the territorial government to sell the property failed due to its notoriety, and in 1912 the buildings were demolished. The land remained vacant until it was finally incorporated into the expanding Las Vegas city limits in the 1940s. Sarah Henderson and her surviving children relocated to Oregon under new identities, provided by the territorial government, a decision made both for their protection and to escape the stigma attached to their family. Sarah remarried in 1910 to a widowed farmer who knew nothing of her past. She never spoke publicly about her previous life, choosing to keep her past buried. Samuel Henderson's life after the trial was marked by both achievement and deep psychological trauma. Using reward money offered for information leading to the capture of the Henderson killers, he financed his education, eventually becoming a teacher and later a school administrator in Oregon. Despite his success, Samuel struggled with guilt over his role in his father's execution and the destruction of his family. In 1925, Samuel wrote a detailed memoir of his experiences, reflecting on the psychological burden of living with such horrific knowledge and the moral courage it took to expose his father's crimes. He never published it, choosing instead to protect the privacy of his sisters and to avoid reopening the wounds of their tragic past. Mary and Rebecca Henderson, in contrast, adapted more easily to their new lives. Both married and raised families, and neither spoke publicly about their childhood experiences. Their lives, while shaped by the trauma of their early years, were spent in relative peace compared to the horror that had defined their early years in the Nevada desert. Mary Henderson, influenced by memories of her mother's healing work, became a nurse, while Rebecca, like her brother Samuel, followed the path of education and became a teacher. Both women stayed in touch with Samuel throughout their lives, but they rarely spoke of their shared past, quietly burying the painful memories of their early years. The trauma of their childhood remained an unspoken bond, yet they moved forward, carving out lives of their own in Oregon. The investigation into the Henderson murders left an indelible mark on law enforcement procedures across Nevada territory and the broader western region. The case highlighted the need for better coordination between local and territorial authorities, particularly in investigating missing person cases, and led to the establishment of new protocols for tracking individuals who disappeared while traveling through sparsely populated areas. Marshall Thompson, who had led the initial investigation and played a crucial role in bringing the case to trial, was promoted to territorial marshal in recognition of his work on the Henderson case. He continued to investigate similar crimes throughout the Southwest, gaining a reputation as one of the most effective law enforcement officers in the region. The burial ground where the Henderson victims were interred became a source of ongoing debate within the Las Vegas community. Some residents believed the bodies should be relocated to a proper cemetery, while others argued that the site should remain undisturbed as a memorial to the victims. Ultimately, the territorial government decided to leave the graves in place, marking the site with a simple stone monument that identified it as a memorial to those who had suffered and died at the hands of the Henderson family. The long-term impact of the Henderson murders on Las Vegas was profound, yet it gradually faded as the city continued to grow. The completion of additional railroad connections and the discovery of mineral resources in nearby areas brought new settlers and economic opportunities that eventually overshadowed the notoriety of the crimes. However, when Nevada banned gambling in 1909, just 1 year after Jeremiah's execution, Las Vegas experienced a temporary economic downturn, with some residents attributing it to the lingering effects of the Henderson scandal. The city's fortunes took a turn for the better, with its incorporation in 1911 and designation as the seat of the newly created Clark County. This marked the beginning of a new era of growth and respectability, and Las Vegas slowly moved beyond its dark past. In 1912, the territorial court ordered that the Henderson case files be sealed primarily to protect the privacy of the surviving family members who had been given new identities. The files remained classified for over 60 years, allowing the case to evolve from documented history to local folklore. By the 1920s, when Las Vegas had grown to over 200-300 residents, the Henderson murders had become part of the region's oral tradition rather than a recent memory. Old-timers occasionally told stories about the desert killer who terrorized travelers in the early days, but these accounts were often dismissed by newcomers as exaggerated frontier legends. The truth about the Henderson murders started to emerge again in the 1970s, when historians researching the early development of Las Vegas found references to the case in the territorial archives. Many details of the case remained classified, and the full extent of Jeremiah Henderson's crimes remained unknown until the 1990s, when the remaining case files were finally made available under Nevada's historical preservation statutes. Modern forensic investigations, conducted in the 1980s as part of a historical preservation project, confirmed many of the original findings and even uncovered new evidence about the systematic nature of the murders. The forensic evidence supported the conclusion that the killings had been planned and executed with the precision of a business operation, consistent with the portrayal of Jeremiah Henderson during his trial. Criminologists who studied the case classified Jeremiah as an organized serial killer, driven primarily by financial gain rather than psychological compulsion. This made his case unique in the history of American criminal activity. The Henderson case has been studied extensively by historians and criminologists as a stark example of how social and economic pressures in frontier life could push ordinary individuals into extraordinary acts of violence. The systematic nature of the crimes, the involvement of multiple family members, and the financial motivation for the murders set this case apart from other documented instances of serial killing in the American West. Samuel Henderson's decision to expose his father's crimes, despite the personal cost to himself and his family, has become an example of moral courage in the face of unspeakable horror. Ethicists and historians alike point to his actions as evidence of how in some circumstances young people can demonstrate greater moral clarity than the adults around them. The long-term psychological effects on the surviving family members have also been the subject of academic study, particularly in understanding the trauma faced by children who witness systematic violence within their own families. Mary and Rebecca Henderson's ability to adapt to normal lives after such a traumatic childhood offers insight into human resilience and the capacity for recovery from severe trauma. The Henderson murders also underscore the challenges faced by law enforcement in the sparsely populated territories of the American West during the early 20th century, where investigations often lacked the resources and coordination needed to track down serial offenders. Despite the shocking nature of the crimes, the Henderson case serves as a reminder of the complexities of human nature and the lasting impact of such tragedies on both the victims and the perpetrators' families. The isolation of frontier communities made it possible for criminals to operate with little fear of detection, as vast stretches of land and limited communication networks allowed them to evade capture for extended periods. The sparse resources available to territorial authorities further complicated investigations, making it difficult to follow through on reports of crimes even when they were acknowledged. Today, the site of the Henderson homestead lies within a suburban development south of Las Vegas, near the present-day Henderson city limits. The city, however, was named not after the infamous family, but for Charles Henderson, a later political figure with no connection to the murders. The burial ground itself has been preserved as a small memorial park with a monument acknowledging the victims. The monument's inscription is carefully worded, reflecting the community's desire to honor the lives lost without sensationalizing their deaths. It reads, "May their souls rest in justice," offering a respectful and quiet tribute to those who sought new beginnings in the Nevada desert, but found only tragedy and peace. The park also features interpretive displays that provide historical context about the rapid growth of Las Vegas and the challenges faced by frontier law enforcement, all while maintaining an appropriate respect for both the victims and the descendants of the families involved. While the descendants of the Henderson family have largely remained private about their connection to the case, one of Rebecca Henderson's granddaughters provided a brief interview in 1998 to a University of Nevada researcher. In her interview, she shared insight into how the family legacy had impacted subsequent generations. "The story was never hidden from us," she explained, "but it was never sensationalized either. We were taught that terrible things had happened, but that our family had also shown courage in stopping them." She went on to describe Samuel as a hero within the family, someone who had done the right thing despite the overwhelming personal cost. "We learned that good people can sometimes find themselves in impossible situations, and that moral courage is often the only way out." This perspective reveals the complexity of the Henderson legacy, a story of horrific crimes, but also of immense moral courage and the eventual triumph of justice over evil. The case shows that even in the darkest of circumstances, individuals can choose to do what is right, regardless of the personal consequences. The Henderson murders remain one of the most thoroughly documented cases of serial killing in American frontier history. The survival of detailed journals, witness testimonies, and physical evidence has allowed historians and criminologists to study the case in unprecedented detail. This wealth of information has provided valuable insights into the psychology of violence and the social conditions that can contribute to such extreme actions. The case also underscores the importance of community vigilance and effective law enforcement in preventing and stopping violent crime. The eventual exposure of Jeremiah Henderson's crimes came about through the combined efforts of a suspicious community, persistent law enforcement officers, and ultimately, a family member who chose to act with moral courage, even at great personal risk. Though the memory of the murders has faded with time, the legacy of the Henderson case continues to offer lessons in justice, resilience, and the power of individual moral decisions to change the course of history. Modern Las Vegas, with its millions of visitors and world-famous entertainment industry, stands in stark contrast to the rough frontier railroad town where the Henderson murders unfolded. Yet the case remains relevant to contemporary discussions on family violence, moral responsibility, and the factors that can drive ordinary people to commit extraordinary crimes. The transformation of Las Vegas from a place where such crimes could remain hidden for years to a vibrant metropolis with sophisticated law enforcement and security systems mirrors the broader evolution of American society in the 20th century. The Henderson case is a reminder of how far we have come, while also illustrating the timeless human capacity for both evil and heroism. The story of the Henderson murders continues to captivate researchers, writers, and students of American history because it encapsulates several themes central to the American experience: the pursuit of prosperity, the challenges of frontier life, the collapse of moral boundaries under extreme pressure, and the courage to do what is right, even when the consequences are dire. In the end, the Henderson case serves as a powerful reminder that the American dream has always carried within it the potential for both triumph and tragedy. Jeremiah Henderson's pursuit of land and wealth in the burgeoning frontier city of Las Vegas led him to commit some of the most systematic murders in American history. But his son Samuel's decision to expose these crimes, even at the cost of destroying his own family, shows that moral courage can emerge even in the darkest of times. This story demonstrates how the promise of opportunity in America's frontier communities could lead even ordinary families to be corrupted when desperation met the absence of moral constraints. But it also shows that individuals can summon the strength to do what is right, even when everything they love is on the line. What do you think of this story? Could you have found the courage to do what Samuel Henderson did, knowing it would destroy your family but save countless innocent lives? Do you believe that the American dream itself creates pressures that can lead people to abandon their moral principles? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts about the choices made by each member of the Henderson family. If you enjoyed this tale of greed, murder, and moral courage in the early American West, subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell and share this video with someone who loves dark mysteries. There are more secrets buried in America's past stories of ordinary families who faced extraordinary choices in the pursuit of the American dream and the consequences that followed. We're here to uncover them all, one haunting tale at a time. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another chapter in the hidden history of our nation's most haunting places. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.